Chapter 1, Hubris, 2046. Scene 3, Philip. The architects of Telepath's International Headquarters were instructed to build a panopticon, like a penthouse apartment, Philip had said, at the top of a building that's open in the center. I want to see all the way down to the lobby. When the team balked, Philip silenced the room. Gentlemen, he said, use your imagination. He rose from his seat to emphasize his point. Give my god deck a glass floor. On a chilly morning 10 years later, the doors slid open as he strode across the helipad and away from the vertical takeoff and land limousine. Philip crossed the threshold and, as if he were floating on thin air, 70 stories spread out like a cavern below his feet. His office was indeed in the center of the building. The glass floor doubled as the ceiling of a massive oval atrium. Spiraling all the way down to the ground, each level had a view of the lobby, either by leaning over the railing or peering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Like a god glaring down from heaven, Philip recalled the work, the sweat, and all the tears he shed while creating Telepath. The most popular consumer brand in the world still required his full attention, not to mention his duties as patriarch of the Northeast, but Victor had seized the day like a terrorist hijacking a plane. Shrugging out of his coat, Philip ground his teeth. I didn't build this, he thought, only to lose it all because of you. A lift appeared in the transparent elevator shaft on the other side of the floor. When the door opened, Samir brought an apple to his mouth. His bite filled the glass room with a loud crack, followed by the crunch of flesh being ground to pieces. This is going to end badly, Samir said. I trust you know that. He ambled toward a chair in the lounge area. Philip joined his friend by slumping onto the couch next to the coffee table. What do we know about these pop watchers? He asked. You mean the 0.1% paparazzi? Samir rolled his eyes. DHS doesn't believe they belong on the list. Philip shook his head. Then why? Victor. As his friend crossed one leg over the other and took another bite, the story behind the group returned to Philip in a rush. Ah, he said, the hackers. He raised a hand to his head and rubbed his temple. Those photos of Irene on that trip to the UK when she was 14. And Olympia, Samir said. You were angry, but Victor was incensed. He wanted every watcher in the country locked up, remember? Philip, Victor, and Natalia had been in the process of stacking Congress with representatives willing to pass the new rule when the girls announced they wanted to meet the royal family. So he arranged a trip to Buckingham Palace, a decision whose timing could not have been worse. Their candidates were in tight races on this side of the pond, while, across the Atlantic, the girls were having tea with the Queen. Passage of the new rule was achieved by running several political cons on the American people, chief among them Anglo-style, an ideologically indifferent social movement whose adherents were obsessed with Victorian-era clothes and misinformation about England. It was so absurd, the news media failed to see that a wave was spreading throughout the country. They were on a glide path to winning the House when the pop watchers tried to turn public opinion against their candidates by posting images of the girls' trip. Social media was on fire for a week with slogans like, Stop the monarchy and reject American royalty. Philip, Victor, and Natalia used their influence over the feds to clamp down on the group. Even though they won the House in the end, and their candidates became known as the Anglo Caucus, Victor was obsessed with revenge. Taking another bite of the apple, Samir looked down and peered at the atrium. The building's maximum capacity was 50,000 people, but this early in the morning, only a trickle of accountants, lawyers, and scientists rode the escalators to their labs or strode across the glass corridors to their offices. Kind of reminds you of when the autocrat was in power, doesn't it? Samir brought his attention back to Philip. The first patriarch on the Council of Nobles wants to eliminate a key provision of the treaty. His eyes went wide as he bobbed his head and his voice took on a mocking tone. Because he's a bloody, angry dad. Philip barked out a laugh. Through the few extra pounds, the salt and pepper hair, and the shadow of age in the reddish-brown skin, he saw a glimmer of the kid who got the highest grade in Econ 101. In addition to being the funniest freshman on campus, Samir had already shown the acumen of a brilliant manager and a skilled tactician. There was never any doubt as to whether they would go into business, and on a day like this, he was the only person in the world with whom Philip could share a laugh. In the last text you sent before the veto landed, Philip said, you mentioned this was all triggered by some video? Yes, Samir shouted. Philip let out a sigh. I thought the FBI had things under control. They did, Samir said, until last night. One of the more advanced features of the Sixth Sense cranial phone was the ability to view media together. Samir sent an invitation to share through the T-Video app. When Philip accepted, a still image of Devon and Olympia appeared over the coffee table. The camera inside the villa must have been trained on the terrace. The night sky was pale, and a burgeoning moon loomed over the ocean. Olympia's body faced the glass door leading into the house, but her head was turned in Devon's direction. Deepfake, Samir said. That's his explanation. When Samir pressed play, Olympia turned away from the house and tiptoed toward the soldier. Apparently, he had no idea what she was doing until he felt her hands on his. Devon's eyes went wide, eliciting a hearty laugh from Samir. Bloody trollop, he spat. You don't buy his story? No, Samir chuckled. I don't. Philip crossed his legs, settled against the cushion, and flung an arm over the back of the couch. Deepfake technology is pretty advanced. Think about it, Philip. The watchers are irritating, but they're not stupid. Deepfakes would ruin their reputation. Authenticity is the only reason they're a threat to the Anglo caucus. He spread his hands like a lawyer pleading a case. I know your daughters are best friends, but that doesn't mean this one. He jabbed a finger at the video. Didn't throw herself at her father's employee. Samir was probably right about the hackers, but his impression of Olympia wasn't entirely fair. Philip didn't assume she was a virgin, although he hoped in his heart that Irene still was. Going all the way back to when they were girls, Olympia's behavior had been easy to misinterpret. Her IQ was off the charts. She was remarkably inquisitive and had an alarming capacity for metacognition. At the tender age of 5, Olympia pondered whether her obsession with hair was an absurd insecurity. At any rate, Samir never liked her parents, which, Philip suspected, colored his opinion. Real or not, Philip said, it's obvious their goal was to piss Victor off. You think? Samir flung his hands in the air. This is Eastern European dictator bullshit. Instead of letting the FBI do their work, Victor wants Onyx Force. He leaned forward in his chair. His private army, with an air of disgust, he tossed the apple core into a nearby bin. To hunt citizens in the domains of other patriarchs. The prevalence of local militias was one of the main challenges they faced when the autocrat was in power, which is why the new rule contained limits on private security. If Onyx Force were allowed to operate outside of Victor's domain, the armies of other patriarchs would do the same within months, and the council would devolve into warring fiefdoms. Philip rubbed his chin. I've got to figure out a way to look supportive without committing to anything officially. That's why they pay you the big bucks. Samir raised his eyebrows. What has Natalia been saying to Ellie? The question was partly based on telepathy and the assumption that Philip connected to Ellie's mind daily. But experiencing a thing wasn't the same as discerning its meaning. Having sorted through her thoughts, Philip knew Onyx Force had come up, but he also knew Natalia discussed the purchase with the air of a woman bragging about her husband's new yacht. They've talked about it, Philip said, but not in a way that sheds light on this. Let's play this out to the end, shall we? Samir raised a fist. 1, the index finger shot up. We know Victor won't change his mind. Nope, Philip said. He's an overconfident prick. 2, another finger. He's about to trigger a leadership fight. You've already got a lot on your plate, and quality time with the family is important to you, but others will see this as an opportunity to become first patriarch. The 5-foot-tall, wily man in charge of California, Washington, and Oregon came to mind immediately. Tafuri, Philip said. With support from Maddox, Samir added. Bear in mind they work as a team. And then there was the world's leading autonomous drone manufacturer. Besides Victor, the patriarch of the Southwest was the only other council member whose main business was advanced weaponry. Watson, Philip said. Down in Texas? Samir nodded his head. Yes, I can see that. He raised the 3rd finger. Point is, once the wolves are on the march, Victor's gladiator instinct will kick in. And with him, Philip said, every fight is to the death, which is why he controls the council in the first place. Samir lowered his hand and leaned back in his chair. Do you see what I'm getting at? Yes, Philip said, and obviously there's only one way to deal with this. Oh yeah, Samir mumbled. What's that? Kick Victor off the council. Samir raised an eyebrow. If you're going to stab the prince, you'd better kill him. True enough, Philip let out a breath. But like Watson, he's got all those damn government contracts. So? The private citizen with the most advanced military technology in the country also happens to be a pissed-off former first patriarch. Philip's eyes went wide as he spread his hands. What could go wrong? Forget about the consul. Vortex makes him the most powerful man in America. Most powerful, huh? Samir said. Well, if that were true, we would be fucked. You see another way? Your modesty, Philip, never ceases to amaze me. Samir glanced down at the glass floor again. Well, modest in some ways, at least. Our only hope lies in something you did. I've done a lot of shit, Philip thought. It's hard to keep track. Samir leaned forward in his chair. This meeting is ostensibly a bid for your support. Philip shrugged. We go all the way back to Harvard. As do we. The man sitting across the table was officially the CFO of Telepath, but as Philip's best friend, Samir was, in reality, the second most powerful person in House Harrington, in charge of everything from vetting candidates, monitoring intelligence gathered in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and keeping Philip on track in such a way that he could spend quality time with Ellie and Irene. Bear in mind, Samir said, Watson has a similar connection to a powerful person. Philip narrowed his eyes. Beto? Samir chuckled, also known as the country's commander-in-chief. Philip fell back against the cushion. Well, fuck me, he said. That's what you meant by something I did. Samir straightened his back and evinced the air of a barrister quoting an official document. No provisions herein will, in any way, supplant the ultimate authority of the United States of America. Philip felt a sudden rush of pride for the second time that morning. He was the reason those words were in the new rule. He had to garner support from the country's most influential stakeholders to outflank Victor, but that safeguard was the last thing they added to the treaty. Each patriarch selected the candidates who ran for office at every level of government within his domain. The president and vice president, however, were different. Every council member had the prerogative of presenting names from which the country could choose. In the last election, America chose Roberto Gonzalez, governor of the great state of Texas. We're in for a rocky ride, Philip said, but you're right. This is our only hope. Get Watson on the phone and set it up. Samir rose to his feet. You've got an opening at noon. Perfect, Philip said. Don't bother bringing Victor up here before the meeting. I'm going to feign support. He'll be gone by then. A wave of reassurance flowed over Philip as he recalled the encounter with his neighbor while walking Sasha that morning. No matter what happened, at least he had the support of old money like Miss Russell. Somehow, she got wind of the video and had war-gamed the situation to its logical conclusion. Ellie has to go to her house and get more information, Philip thought. As Samir strolled into the elevator, Philip brought up the time. 8 o'clock. They had less than an hour. As if he were planning to take a nap, Philip kicked off his shoes and sprawled across the couch. In many ways, telepathy was like dreaming. The experience of using the app was best when the user's eyes were closed. Philip's heart rate slowed as the sixth sense cranial phone reached across the synapses in his brain like a mystic taking control of his soul. In anticipation of Ellie's reaction to what Victor was trying to do, he infused the invitation to connect with the confidence that everything would be okay. Telepathy was managed by an army of AIs who, during the clinical trials, decided that participants needed to believe that each human mind had something akin to its own climate. Ellie's inner world was chilly and slightly overcast when the day was good and racked by violent storms when the day was bad. Her climate had switched from one to the other the first time they tried this. Without meaning to, Philip had triggered the recall of a pivotal event in her life. Forgetting was essential for humans to function, but archiving your thoughts doesn't mean your memories are gone. In that first connection, Ellie's inner world was dark, cold, and cloudy when Philip entered, but it became pale and chilly when she saw his motivation for using telepathy. I want to know why you have those crazy fits, was the first thing he'd said through the app. Overflowing with a genuine desire to walk in her shoes, he unwittingly shook the childhood memory loose. Few understood telepathy better, but Philip was truly amazed as he slipped into Ellie's past. She was 3 and playing in the park. Her parents were nearby, sitting on a bench. With the lightheartedness of youth, Philip experienced the moment when a little girl noticed a bed of lilies next to a tree. The world was full of discoveries, and her attention was consumed by a desire to touch, but as she ran towards the flowers, something shattered in her head. Philip, the man, felt a tear roll down his cheek as he collapsed with the little girl who'd become the love of his life. Writhing on the ground, they couldn't respond when Ellie's mom rose from the bench and screamed her name. Watching her go through this was one thing, quite another to experience it for himself. The 6th Sense cranial phone was a fantastic innovation, but telepathy was nothing short of a miracle. Philip finally understood that the dynamics defining their childhoods were flipped. He was an orderly person trapped by birth in an emotionally chaotic household, but Ellie was in a constant state of unease. Her ability to thrive was only possible because she had extraordinarily loving parents. David and Ann Pettypiece transferred that responsibility to Philip the day before he and Ellie left for college. It was one of the reasons he graduated at the top of his class, and was precisely what he needed to go up against Victor. Philip said a prayer of thanks when Ellie connected. Today was a good day. Her inner world was chilly and slightly overcast. "We've got this," he said, but as she rummaged through his thoughts, the white clouds took on a hazy charcoal look, and the sky became blood red. "Oh my God," Ellie said, grasping the threat to the council, the threat to telepath, the threat to their lives. Her environment was always chilly, but this was the first connection during which it became bone cold. "We have a plan," Philip said, as he drew her attention to the fact that they had less than 20 minutes. For the sake of due diligence, he retraced his steps through the conversations she'd had with Natalia in the last couple of weeks. "I really don't remember anything," she said. "As you told Samir, she talks as if Victor's army is a plaything." As a reminder that Irene had returned to the house, a streak of laughter burst through the wall of the bedroom Philip shared with his wife. Then Olympia yelled, "Why did you tell him that?" "Shh," Irene hissed. "Let's go to the kitchen. You're going to wake Mom." The girls were anything but quiet as they entered the hall and descended the stairs. "How long has Olympia been there?" Philip asked. "She was here when I got up," Ellie said. Probing his mind, she forced him to remember walking Sasha that morning. "Oh," she said, "you heard Irene come in, but you thought she was alone. I went right back to sleep after Sasha woke me up." Philip felt himself yawn as the dog trotted over to take a pee, and then, because of the chill, he rubbed his hands together for warmth. "I always tell you to bring a hat and gloves," Ellie admonished. "You never listen." Philip forced her attention to Miss Russell's words. "Get her to tell you what she knows." "I think you're right, though," Ellie said. "She's really only being nosy about the house. She's going to focus her attention on Irene, not me." "Bring Olympia," Philip said. Where his confidence had failed, giving Ellie something to do as part of the plan succeeded. As she calmed down, the charcoal clouds disappeared, and the cold gave way to a mild chill. "Good idea," she said. He hated having to cut this short, but as if there was a church in the distance, Monocle triggered an alert that sounded like the chime of a bell. His meeting with Victor was in 15 minutes. Even without the mental link, Ellie understood that home was home and work was work. "Bye," she said. "Bye." When Philip opened his eyes, he shut Monocle down, but moments later, the phone returned to life in his head. S. Camelot 1 is requesting permission to enter New York airspace. P. Granted. The helipad faced west. Slowly, Philip slipped into his shoes, rose from the sofa, and approached the door. Beyond the glass, there was only room for the vertical takeoff and land limousine and his airship Proscenium. A wind tunnel appeared 1,000 meters in the sky. Camelot's V-drive had essentially spun up a tornado, turned it on its side, and extended it from Salt Lake City, Utah to Manhattan, New York. In accordance with House Harrington's official color, Proscenium's translucent panels were ruby, but as Victor's airship emerged from the mouth of the vortex, it spread emerald wings and tilted toward the earth. Having been designed to resemble talons, the landing gear made the ship look like an eagle, as swirls of air steadied its graceful descent toward the secondary helipad on the 50th floor of the building. As Philip turned and approached the elevator, he ground his teeth. 5 years ago, they defeated an autocrat. There was no way in hell that he would let his old college roommate become one himself. Philip had to devise a way to beat Victor.